This is Abe Friedtanzer from Awards Buzz, and I'm very excited to be talking to Sam Yates about Magpie. How are you, Sam?
I'm well, thank you. I'm very well. Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, I had the chance to see this film on my last day at South by Southwest this past March, and it was a good one to, sort of end on. I saw a little after it, but it was really has stuck with me. And I don't want to talk too much about why it stuck with me because I want audiences to experience that. But I am curious, how did you first come to this project?
Well, I was sent the script by my agent, and I read it and immediately responded to it, particularly to like the themes of desire and kind of escape fantasies, and what happens when you suppress things for too long that they become quite explosive and powerful. And so, yeah, I read it, I responded to it, and then I pitched a few times, met Daisy, Tom, and Kate, and yeah, the rest is history.
And Tom is somebody who's obviously a lot better known for his acting than his writing. What was it like working with someone who primarily has been in front of the camera?
Well, it was fantastic working with Tom. I mean, many actors who turn to writing often seem to do it quite seamlessly, I guess because they've certainly worked on a lot of scripts, and secondly, they kind of know what kind of feels good to actors, which is, a certain proportion of what a writer needs to do. But it was just a very compelling, taut story. So it was a pleasure. We collaborated a bit on the script as we got into it. He was very open to that and visual elements and the sort of things I wanted to bring to it, as was Daisy. So it was a pleasure.
I think you're very deliberate with the camera in terms of what we show and we don't show, which has to do a lot with the story and, what eventually we get to. Were there specific rules you follow in order to make sure that the camera was tight enough to know we were only seeing what you wanted the audience to see in that moment?
Well, it is definitely an exercise in what you don't show, and what you do show. So, I mean, everything was pretty well planned, I would say. And there were kind of like distinctive visual styles, like the text message style is a certain way. And obviously Daisy's character Annette, when she's at home, the kind of more psychological sections of the film were shot in a certain way. So yeah, it was all about kind of, when you direct anything, you're asking the question, how can I bring the themes of the piece to life visually, and finding kind of interesting ways to do that with camera, or with lighting, or with movement. So that was always the kind of question, is how to kind of bring out the theme here, or even the kind of beat of the scene through camera.
Does really feel like it's two separate worlds, that she's home and just miserable by herself. And then, he's out living the life. But even so, Ben still, it still doesn't feel like he has this larger world. It feels like he's very, very wrapped up, with his daughter and more so with, Alicia. And so it's interesting to me how sort of you would expect with Annette that the whole world is tuned out because she's so isolated and lonely. But I also felt the same with Ben, even when we were watching him surrounded by all these people.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I guess they're both in their own way kind of really frustrated with their lives. And, in Ben's case, he seems to blame a lot of that on his partner. And he's also a writer, a novelist who's kind of dried up a little bit and lost some of his kind of potency. And I think he sees Alicia, played by Matilda Lutz, as a kind of who's a kind of beautiful, famous actress in the film. Um, Sees her as a kind of way to recharge his batteries and his kind of lust for life, and sees her as the solution to all of his problems. So, yes, they're both a little bit trapped in different ways, and they both escape in different ways too.
When you saw the film with other people, were you surprised by people's reactions, especially to the way the film ends?
Yes, it was kind of incredible actually. And you spoke about South by, and that was like 350 people, and it was a really beautiful theater in the center of town. And yeah, it was kind of wild. I mean, there was like very vocal reactions to certain things that we hadn't anticipated, especially to Ben and his kind of behavior. It's kind of villainous on some level. Not that I would judge him, but he's considered villainous in the film, and the rounds of applause at certain things, and also the laughter. Like, I'm really pleased that there's a sort of tone to it that is fun and also allows you to laugh. That it just isn't a kind of relentless piece of tension. So yeah, that was a really wild experience, and I'm really excited. We're premiering in New York on Friday, and I'm very excited to see again with a sort of hefty audience there.
It's interesting because I was looking back and the genre list is thriller. And while this is a thriller, I'm not sure that's enough to describe it because you're right, there are definitely some funny moments that, whether they're intended that way or not, definitely do, you certainly chuckle. But also, there's a definite, isolating intensity to it.
Well, it's funny, isn't it, when you're trying to mm, fit a film into a genre. I agree with you, I think, and deliberately it has sort of elements of noir as well. And I suppose specifically the elements of noir that I really, really like are when people are behaving in kind of morally questionable ways, right? And also the question that a noir seems to ask is how far, when pushed, how far will an ordinary person go in their behavior? So I suppose that is quite a cool recipe for bad behavior and kind of odd behavior. And that's really, I find it really funny. I find the extremes of behavior very, very funny. So yeah.
He's obviously a very high profile, actor to headline this film. And I feel like you'll have some Star Wars fans seeking this out with no idea whatsoever what they're going to get themselves into. I know, having seen Sometimes I Think About Dying, that she does do some sort of smaller indie stuff that's a lot quieter. But, what do you think people will find when they come looking for Daisy just because she's Daisy in this much, much quieter role?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, I remember very vividly on set the first time she came on camera. I was sort of at the monitor, and immediately, we'd set up the frame. We'd been lighting for a while, and she steps in, and she absolutely has this kind of just movie star effect immediately just by simply being there. And on top of that, I think what she's done here is a really remarkable performance. It's very, very detailed. It's very cruel. It's very vulnerable. It's very powerful. Like she really is moving in a very subtle and subtextual way, and then in an ultimately very, very powerful way. But I feel like she charted the journey from a woman who was very, very suppressed and diminished to someone who exacts uh, revenge slash takes power of her own life in a kind of remarkable, very, very well calibrated way. So it was a real pleasure. And I think that any fans of Daisy will really, really enjoy this. She is in practically every frame of the film, and it's all the better for it. So.
I also say Shahzad Latif, does a great job of just being like the role model for what all husbands and fathers should not be. That's what I was thinking about. I have, an infant at home, and I was like, this makes me feel very bad. I haven't done anything like this, but I just, I can feel that just from this movie being like every little thing I did is nowhere near as bad as this, but this guy's really, really awful.
Sure. I mean, he really is like a villain you like love to hate, I think. That was something I was really cheered by with in front of audiences. He's kind of, he really pitches it so well. You're right. I mean, he's a very inward-looking character, like a lot of men can be, and I think it's fair to say, and especially when men can blame, and women, of course, can blame their situation on someone else and make it their fault, and therefore completely treat them like trash and throw them away in pursuit of their own kind of gain. But he um he was really wonderful in the film, I think. I mean, I love watching him too.
Wonderful, I think, is an interesting choice of word, but I think he's excellent. He's very good. Wonderful, I don't know if I agree with that. Yes.
Yeah, I'll give you that, Abe.
Well, I know you're very involved in, the promotion of this film, but what's next for you? Do you have another project that you've worked on or are working on?
I do. So it's actually a stage project with Andrew Scott. It's called Vanya. It's coming to New York next year to the Lucille Lortel Theatre. We did it in the West End last year, and it went well. And we're really happy to be bringing that to New York. So that's that. And then I'm doing a TV miniseries on Agatha Christie called Towards Zero for BBC with Angelica Houston and Matthew Reese. So there's a few interesting things coming up, quite different, but I'm very lucky indeed to be working on them.
Awesome. Well, I noticed you've done a lot of theater, and I was curious, how do you think this film would work as a play, and would it?
Wow, what a good question. I hadn't thought of that at all. I suppose you'd have to totally, I mean, there are many differences between film and theatre, millions. I consider them totally unrelated, actually, except for the fact that they're stories and there's actors. But other than that, theatre is essentially a long, wide shot, and film, obviously, you have the choice of umpteenth kind of angles and how you light it, how you score it. So I don't know really. I think probably not. I think it's too psychological and too hopefully cinematic to translate super well to stage. And I think the best stuff on stage is inherently made for the theatre and it's theatrical in its bones, if you know what I mean. And I think while this is an interesting story, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should think about that more carefully.
Well, I do think I'm thinking about a specific scene or two that would not work well on the stage, and also I think the phone, the texting, is something that's not very distracting in this film. And I feel like if you had to type out messages, and put it behind, like that would definitely be. So I like that because I feel like there are a lot of films that feel a lot like plays, which can be good, but the fact that this has to be a movie, I think, is really unique and cool.
I think so. I hope so. I think the best films can only ever be films, and the best plays can only ever be plays.
Again, I didn't get to ask you everything I want to because I would love to deep so much more into all the dive into all the spoilers, but I want people to get to experience this, and it's such a pleasure talking about this. Thank you so much for your time, Sam.
Very, very much a pleasure.